Good morning. Good morning. If you are here for the day, please let me know in the comments. Or at least for block one. So yesterday, actually I should start off by asking, are there any questions from yesterday? So yesterday we went through just the sort of the general idea of evolution and the evidence for theory and law and natural selection. So today we're going to be expanding on the idea of natural selection a little bit. We're going to be talking about directionality of selection and sort of like and how a selective force can potentially act on a population. And by that I mean obviously I'm going to do a note together with you. It's pre-recorded. It's right here. But let me just very briefly summarize what we're sort of going to get into. So if you can imagine in a population, and I'm going to pick a classic example. I'm going to go with the giraffe example. Okay, this is sort of a classic example in evolutionary biology. So you've got a organism like a giraffe with a certain neck length. And there's variability. Oh boy, these legs are going to be horrible. They have a certain length of neck, but there's variability. So if you were to actually graph neck length in the population, which I'm going to do, this is population. Actually, hold on. No, I want it the other way. And you don't need to write any of this down, guys. This stuff is in the note too. I mixed these up. Neck length here is on the x-axis. Population is on the y-axis. Population is how many are there with a particular neck length. So if you were to look at a graph of this, you would see what's called a normal distribution. Okay, a normal distribution just means that the average is the most common, and the further you get away from the average, the less common it is. And a huge number of things fall naturally into a normal distribution. I'll give you another example. If you look at the number of people with a particular average heart rate, right in the middle would probably be something like 72 beats per minute. And then that's the most people usually have the average. And then as you get further and further away from the average, fewer and fewer people are going to have that number because it's more unusual to have it as you go further and further away, or whatever. Honestly, you can pick pretty much anything. A lot of things follow a normal distribution. So later on, when you guys in university, when you do statistics and stuff, then you talk all day about normal distributions. But I'm not going to spend a ton of time on it. But so you can imagine that there's a neck length that is the most common in the giraffe population, and that's the average. That's right here. Okay. If their food source is like a really tall tree, what you'll notice is that the really tall giraffes, or the ones that have the longer neck, are able to reach up and get that food. But the smallest giraffes, the ones that are like only have their neck this long, they're not going to be able to reach that food. This is a selection happening in nature. In other words, nature is saying, if you've got a long neck, you get to survive and reproduce. If you don't have a long neck, you don't get to survive and reproduce. So what that actually does is it says that this area of the graph right here has a better survivability, and it might actually be this and longer, so like everything in this direction has a higher survivability than the other side of the graph. In other words, longer neck is better for survival. Okay, provides you for a selective advantage. So what we say then here is that there is a selective pressure pushing the population over time to move in this direction, because the ones that are on the other side over here are probably not going to survive, or they're going to have a great deal of difficulty surviving. So generation after generation after generation, if you watch this population, what eventually happens is you actually get a shift in where the average is located until it correctly matches what the environment is, and then the selective pressure goes away, because now the average is the most survivable. That's what happens, and it'll keep shifting until the average is the most survivable. So what can happen in nature, and what happened to the giraffe, is that as the giraffe is evolving a longer and longer neck, the acacia tree is also evolving. It's actually evolving to grow higher because it's trying to avoid its predator that's eating its leaves. And so you have this: giraffes' necks get a little longer, trees get a little higher. Giraffes' necks get a little longer, trees get a little higher. And then eventually you end up with a giraffe with a heckin' long neck in order to reach the acacia tree. So that's the general principle here, and obviously you can get really significant changes occurring over time. There's small incremental changes, but over time they can build to really big differences. So this idea of one thing evolving and then another thing, and then the first thing has to evolve to compete with it, and then the other thing evolves, and then they evolve, and then the other thing evolves, and they go back and forth like that, is called coevolution. And they talked actually about this a little bit in the plants video that you watched, the one on flowers. They talked about how bees or a particular species of bee and a particular species of flower co-evolved to have this mechanism where the bee can like do a little vibration at a certain frequency, and they can like release the pollen from the flower. That's a co-evolved trait. So it works very similarly to this, in that those things are evolving into each other. Basically, one is evolving more to be specific to the bee, and then the bee is evolving specifically to be with that flower, and then the flower is evolving to be more specific to the bee, and then the bee is evolving to be more specific to the flower, and each of those small steps provides both of them with an advantage. So you end up having things co-evolve with each other. That is also, by the way, the reason why, and poor Australia, stuck with the most dangerous animals in the world, worst spiders, worst snakes. And that's because they have an island, and it is an environment where a lot of coevolution has happened with regards to things like snake venom and stuff like that. So I'll give you an example. If you've got like a mongoose, I don't talk about any of these examples in the notes, so this is not like, I don't think, so this isn't going to be crazy. This is a horrible mongoose, I'm so sorry. Anyway, this is supposed to be a mongoose, which eats snakes, by the way. Looks like a lizard or something. And then you got your snake. And so what's happened is that the snake has evolved venom to kill its predator, in this case the mongoose. But then the mongoose has evolved. What's happened is that some members of the mongoose population have a fairly high resistance to the venom, and so they're the only ones that survive and reproduce, because the ones without venom resistance, they just get killed by the snakes. So now the venom resistance of the mongoose is evolving to become stronger. Okay. And you can think about this going back to the graph here. We have got venom resistance. And we've got population. And so let's say that we've got a distribution like this, but only the ones on the far right are going to survive because they have better venom resistance and they need to eat the snakes. So over time, there's a selective pressure that is going to be pushing the mongoose in this direction, higher and higher and higher venom resistance. Well, you can imagine that the snake has got the exact same thing going on, right? Only the snakes then with the most potent venom are going to be the ones that are going to be able to kill the mongoose. The ones with the weak venom can't kill the mongoose. So the exact same thing is happening over here with the snake, except the snake has got venom strength going up. Because only the strongest venom, did I just spell strength right? Yeah. Only the strongest venom, that would be like the venom over here, is going to kill the mongoose. And so over time, this is going to shift over and shift over and shift over. And they keep co-evolving with each other over time until you get a super, super venomous snake and a super, super venom resistant mongoose. Whenever you read about something that's like, oh, this spider can kill a human, or each ounce of its venom can kill 10,000 humans. And you think, well, look, why would it need to kill 10,000 humans? What's the point of that? It's not for humans. That's not the reason that they evolved that venom, because it doesn't kill 10,000 of their predator. It only kills one of their predator. but that it just so happens that their predator has evolved a resistance to their venom. And so as far as humans are concerned, which we didn't co-evolve with that animal, it kills us 10,000 times. So there's anyway, that's where that interplay comes from, and the reason why you get these crazy things in nature happening. And so again, that's a selective pressure. So you can have a selective pressure that's pushing you in one direction, like this, and then you can also have directional. I'm not going to get into too much detail of the other types of selective pressure because I go through it in the note. But you can have a pressure that says, okay, only the average is good. Okay, only the average is good, and everything outside of the average is bad. So that'd be like if what's a good example of this? Wing length. Okay, you got a bird. Okay, and then too long a wing, too heavy. Bird can't fly. Okay, too short a wing, takes too much energy to fly. Got to flap it too fast. Okay, so there's like an average size wing for the bird that is like their ideal wing length, and so that is going to be favored, and it's going to be pushing in both directions to keep it in the center. That's called stabilizing selection. Okay, and that's acting all the time. By the way, that is happening to humans all the time. We've had a very stable population in terms of our characteristics over the last probably 50,000 years. And a big part of that is because stabilizing selection has selected that a lot of human features have stayed the same, although there have been small incremental changes. But anyway, a lot of stabilizing selection. I mean, whenever you hear about a species that's been the same for a long time, it just means that its environment has been consistent for that entire time, and it's been stabilizing all of its features. Sharks, for example, so their environment's been very similar over time. Alligators, things that are everyone says like they're prehistoric. It just means they're experiencing a lot of stabilizing selection. And then the last part here is, what if the average sucked? What if to be right in the middle is actually the least survivable? So being on the extremes is the most survivable. So if you get that happening, what ends up happening is you get a distribution, then you have nothing in the middle, and then you get a second distribution. In other words, it's good to be the longest or the biggest or the whatever, and it's good to be the shortest, but it's really bad to be anything in the middle. This part in the middle is like not very survivable. So like really long beak is good because you can get the pollen or get the nectar from a flower. Really short beak, you can eat insects, but in the middle, you can't eat anything. So it's not good for anything. When this happens, this is called disruptive selection. When there's a disruption, which is basically the pressure is pushing in both directions. So it's pushing in this direction and this direction. That's when we start to see things like speciation happening or a new species forming. So anyway, I'm going to go through this in the note. I probably already talked about it a little bit too much, but I'm going to go through it with you, discuss those things. If that didn't make any sense to you, I'm going to review it. So it's all in this note, which is somehow running in the background here. Whoops, stop. And then there's a YouTube video here that discusses the different types of selection. It provides some extra examples of the different types of selections, and they're excellent examples. There's a little section right at the... Yeah, here we go. Here we go. And it talks about some human examples of selection as well. Bacteria or bacteria resistance and stuff like that, antibiotic resistance. So anyway, that's the first block. The lesson's fairly brief. It's 34 minutes. You should probably have some extra time at the end. And there are a couple questions from the textbook and a little exit quiz to check your knowledge on the types of selection. Okay. In the second block, we're going to talk about, well, eventually, if you get these large-scale changes happening over time, maybe you're going to have enough change to cause a new species to form. That process is called speciation. So I have a little video here, actually 2 videos. They're both excellent, and they both cover slightly different things about speciation. The first one talks about allopatric and sympatric speciation, which you need to know the difference between those terms. And then the second one here is going to talk in more general terms about a bunch of about species in general and about how new species form. So there's 2 little videos that go along with that. I actually used to have my own note here for this as well. And then the animations in here are far better than what I could do in my notes. So I switched to these videos. There's a little reading from the textbook that talks about the reproductive isolation mechanisms. If you'll remember, what a species is a population where they can interbreed and make fertile offspring, right? So in order to get 2 different species, you need to have a break in that species where there are certain members that can't reproduce with other members. Okay, that's called reproductive isolation. Once you have members that can't reproduce with each other anymore, they're different species at that point. So there are different ways in which a species can be reproductively isolated. And they are right here. These are the types of isolation mechanisms. This is a little Google Doc, by the way. You don't need to hand this in. This doesn't go in your notes document. But these questions go along with Chapter 8.2 in the text. And you just answer them as you go. Okay, so I would consider probably reading the questions before you start reading Chapter 8.2. And then you just answer them as you go through. And then you fill in this little table. This table is a summary of the reproductive isolation mechanisms. There are 4 or 5 questions on the quiz at the end about reproductive isolation specifically. So you should have this document, the copy that you make of this document, handy somewhere for when you're writing the quiz, because you're going to want to reference it. Okay, so that's what we're up to. We are going to come back at 11:05 for, and there's a little extra quiz at the end as usual. We're going to come back at the end, or at 11:05. Take attendance, and then I'm going to open things up for questions as well. Sometimes people have questions about these, about reproductive isolation, about the selective pressures and stuff like that, or general evolution questions, and we'll take those 11:05 as well. All right, guys, I'm going to let you get to work. Please let me know if you need anything. I'm going to be marking your assignments, and hopefully very shortly I'll be able to update you on at least one assignment, 1 or 2 is what I'm shooting for.